So this is an example of a Hardy-Weinberg principle problem where they're going to give us a small detail of the population or a frequency, and then we're going to have to use that to calculate a variety of other things that they ask us for. So in the Hardy-Weinberg principle, under the right conditions, we're going to use two equations in order to solve the rest of these or find them out. So what we're going to use is we're going to use p squared plus 2pq plus q squared is equal to 1. The second equation that we're going to be using is p plus q is equal to 1. So this basically means the number of dominant alleles plus the number of recessive alleles will give you 1, which stands for 100% of the population. So what they give us is that the percentage of the homozygous recessive genotype little a is 36%. Well, in order to understand this and fit it into a formula, we need to understand what the formula tells us. So we know that p squared is the frequency of the homozygous dominant genotype in that population. 2pq stands for the frequency of the heterozygous dominant frequency in this population, and q squared stands for the homozygous recessive frequency in this population. So if we know that the homozygous recessive genotype AA is 36% the frequency within this population, we know we can get 36% and we can convert that to 0.36 for a viable form in order to plug it into the formula. So, and we actually don't need to plug it into a formula, because if we already know that the homozygous recessive genotype is 0.36, then we can already say that the frequency of that genotype is 0.36. Now we need to find the frequency of the A allele. So what we need to do is, because we established that 0.36 is equal to q squared in this equation, we can just do q squared is equal to 0.36. Then we just take the square root of each side to solve for q, which is the q in this equation, and then we figure out that it's 0.6. So this is the frequency of the little a, or the recessive allele in this population. So we have 0.6. Now they ask us, what's the frequency of the A allele? Well, instead of doing a whole bunch of complicated math, we can just use this equation, which gives us p plus q equals to 1. So we can just plug in q into that equation. P plus 0.6 is equal to 1. Subtract 0.6 from each side, minus 0.6, and then that's going to give us that p is equal to 0.4. This already tells us the frequency of the dominant allele, big A, in this population. So we know that this is 0.4. Then we're going to have the frequencies of the genotypes homozygous dominant and heterozygous dominant. So how do we find that? Well, we go back to the original equation. So we have p squared, so let's just plug in our value for p. So we have 0.4 squared, so we're going to square that, and then we're going to get 0.16. So that gives us p squared, which originally we established that was going to be the frequency of the first genotype, homozygous dominant. So we can already put our first answer. And our second answer is asking for the heterozygous dominant frequency. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this part of the equation, 2pq, and we're going to plug in our values that we already have. So we have 2 times p. We established that p was 0.4. Then we're going to multiply that times q. Q we established here that was 0.6. And then that's going to give us 0.48. Now we have 0.48, we know how many, or the frequency of the organisms in this population. 0.48 is the heterozygous dominant. Finally, they ask us the frequency of the two possible phenotypes if the dominant allele is completely dominant over the recessive allele. So what we're going to do is we're going to get 100% of the population, so 100% of the population, and we're going to subtract that from the original 36% that is homozygous recessive that does not have the dominant allele at all. So minus 36%, and then we're going to get 64%. And then after we get 64%, we're going to convert that into decimal form. So we're going to, this yields 0.64. And finally, that is the amount or the frequency of organisms that have the two or no, this is the first frequency, and then the second frequency would just be 0.36 originally. That just has the recessive allele.